Yo, what's good fam? Welcome to the channel. Today we're diving into the basics of CSS. Now that stands for Cascading Style Sheets if you didn't know. We're going to break down what CSS is, why it's important, and how it makes your web pages look good. So stick around if you want to learn how to make your website stand out. Now I'm going to paste an example that I've used in a previous video. Now when you put headings in HTML, they come out looking larger than the other text. Now with paragraphs, they break onto a new line and got some space between them. And with links, they're usually colored and underlined so you can spot them easily in the mix of all the text. What you're seeing here are the browser's default styles. These are the basic styles that the browser slaps in your HTML to make sure it's readable, even if you haven't put any extra styling on it. So even without fancy CSS, the page still looks alright and you can read it without struggling. However, the web would be dead boring if all sites look the same. But with CSS, you control exactly how HTML looks in the browser, showing off your markup with any design you want, making your site look good without the basic default styles. As I've mentioned before, CSS is the language for styling and laying out documents for users. A document is usually a text file set up with a markup language. HTML is the most common, but you might bump into SVG or XML too. Now, presenting a document means making it usable for your audience. Like browsers like Firefox, Chrome, or Safari show these docs visually on screens, projectors, or printers. CSS can be used for simple text styling, like changing the color and the size of heading and links. You can use it to create layouts, like turning a single column of text with a main content area and a sidebar for related info. It can even do effects like animations. We'll go through these in detail in later videos. CSS is a rule-based language. You can set the rules by specifying rules for certain elements or groups of elements on your web page. Now, firstly, we need to create a style sheet. So we could just add this here, right? Adding new file, right? Style.css. And then now we actually need to link it to the HTML by using the link tag. Now we do this by adding link, and we could put rel of style sheet and add the href of the file name. So style.css. Okay, now let's go back into our style sheet. So let's say we want the main heading to be a large red text. Now we could target it by using the H1 and setting the color to red, and let's say the font size to something like 5 rem. And now if we save, we can see that change has taken effect. Now just to go over what we did, we've targeted all H1s by putting H1 here. So this is the selector. And then next we've got a set of curly braces. Inside these braces you have one or more declarations, which are a pair of properties and values. So you specify the property, like we've got color, before the colon, and the value, like red, after the colon. Now this example has two declarations, one for color and one for font size. Each pair specifies a property of the element and the value we want to give that property. Now CSS properties can take different values depending on what property you're setting. Like in this example, the color property can be any color, and the font size property can use various size units, like pixels, rems, EMs. Now a CSS style sheet will have loads of these rules written one after another. So let's say if we wanted to target the paragraph tag and we wanted to change the color to, let's say, purple. If we just save that, we can see that all the paragraph tags have now changed. Now, you'll pick up some values quickly, but others you might need to look up. You can go through the docs to check out properties and their values, whether you forget or you just want to see what else you can use. Now, since there's loads that you can style with CSS, the language is split into modules. You'll see these modules mentioned on the Mozilla docs. The documentation pages are often organized around a specific module. Now, for example, let's check out the MDN docs, just so I can show you. Now, if we go through CSS, and here we have the modules. So if we go through backgrounds and borders, now this goes through everything for the topic. So it's purpose, properties, and features. Now this module also links to the specifications that define the tech. So right now you don't need to stress about how CSS is structured, but knowing about modules can help you find information easier. If you know a property is related to others, it's probably in the same spec. Now, for example, If we're looking at the backgrounds and borders modules, it makes sense that we can find the background color property and also the border color property, which is just here. Now, all web standards text like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are defined in massive documents called specifications or specs. Now, these specs are published by standards organizations like the W3C and the ECMA or ECMA, and they lay out exactly how the text should behave. Now, CSS is the same. It's developed by a group within the W3C called the CSS Working Group. This group includes reps from browsers and other companies with a stake in CSS, plus some invited experts who act as independent voices. New CSS features are developed or specified by the CSS Working Group. Now, sometimes a browser vendor wants a new feature, other times web designers and developers ask for it, and sometimes the working group spots a need. Now, CSS is always evolving with new features coming out. But a key thing about CSS is that changes are made carefully so that old websites don't break. Now, if you were to visit a site built in the year 2000, it should still work today. As a newcomer, you might find CSS specs overwhelming. They're meant for engineers to use for implementing features in browsers, not for web developers to learn from. Even experienced developers prefer using the MDN docs or other tutorials, but it's good to know that these specs exist and understand the link between the CSS you use, browser support, and the specs. Once a CSS feature has been specified, it's only really useful if one or more browsers have implemented it. This means the code's been written to turn our CSS instructions into what you see on the screen. We'll get into more of this in a future video on how CSS works, but usually not all browsers support a new feature at the same time. So there's a period where CSS features works in some browsers and not others. That's why checking implementation status is key. Now, on every MDN CSS property page, there's a table called browser compatibility. Now, this shows the browser support status. Now, you can check this table to see if a property can be used on your site. Now, what I would suggest is using a site like Can I Use. So if we just search Can I Use, and within here you can search for any property. So let's say like grid, and you can see the browser compatibility for each CSS property. So let's say for subgrid, we can see what browsers and what browser versions support it. Now, depending on what you need, you can use this table to see how a property is supported across different browsers. Check if your specific browser version supports it, or find out if there are any issues for the browser and the version you're using. Alright fam, that's a wrap on the basics of CSS. Now we've covered what CSS is, how it helps style your web pages, and why it's essential for making your sites look slick. Now remember, CSS is the key to turning plain HTML into something visually stunning. Alright, catch you next time. Peace.